Everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch number 87. Today's topic is going to be on recreating Cassandra API using Astra and Stargate. So Astra's baked-in functionality with Stargate that you get. Today's topic is going to be covered by Obi. He's an engineer here at Anant. So the current co-organizers for the event are Rahul and myself. We are looking for guest speakers or sponsors. If you're interested in being a guest speaker, you can reach out to me at arpan.patel@anant.us. Also, if you're looking to sponsor Cassandra Lunch or even our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch, you can always reach out to me as well. We are a part of Data Community DC. Data Community DC is an inclusive environment that encourages and welcomes all people of race, gender, sexual orientation, and we expect respect to be given to all. Data Community DC is built up of a bunch of different organizations. Our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch, is under Data Wranglers DC. But if you're interested in all the various different kinds of communities and events that are hosted by or under the umbrella of Data Community DC, you can find out more on their website as well as their events. So what do we cover here? We cover everything that is or talks or plays well with Cassandra, whether that be open source Cassandra, enterprise versions, or variants like DataStax, Skilla, Keyspaces, Cosmos DB, but then we also cover things in the ecosystem that play well with Cassandra, like Spark, Kafka, Airflow, etc. So anything that is or talks to or plays well with Cassandra. So this is generally a time for new people to introduce themselves. So if you're watching on YouTube, drop a hello in the live chat. We have someone on there that can respond. And if you're new on the Zoom call as well, you can drop something in the chat. Group rules: if you have a question, ask it. Be polite and courteous to others. This is a community, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Or if you have any additional comments you would like to add to the conversation, please do share what you know with us. But please be courteous to the speaker's preference. Depending on the speaker, they may have some preferences in terms of when they prefer questions or comments to be asked, whether they be in the chat or if you can just go ahead and speak up and unmute yourself. But please respect the speaker's preferences. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data platforms, data analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So Cassandra is our bread and butter. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University is also a sponsor for having in-person events. They provide venue space. We also have some institutional or organizational sponsors. This is a point in time if anyone has any announcements, jobs, meetups, hackathons that they would like to promote or publicize, they can drop information in the chat. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop it in the live chat there as well, or as a comment. So one thing we do want to bring to everyone's attention, if you missed it last week, but DataStax Astra is having a build-a-thon. You can find out more. We'll drop the link in the chat in a minute once we transition over to the guest speaker for today. But essentially, DataStax is putting on a build-a-thon that will last 3 months, and each month we'll have a round of challenges. So 3 months and 3 rounds, depending on your schedule or with your teammates or by yourself or your coworkers, whoever you're doing the build-a-thon with, you can either do the first month, second month, or third month, or you could do all 3 months. The top 3 winners of each round qualify to present their project ideas on demo day, which will be on May 28th. And then there's a bunch of cash prizes as well as swag prizes. And you can find out more at the link that I will drop in the chat. So some of our promotions, Anant is hiring full-time or part-time positions, whether that be data platform operator, engineer, architect. If you are interested, you can find out more at careers.anant.us. Cassandra Lunch is now currently on Thursdays. It was originally on Wednesdays, so this is just a reminder that Cassandra Lunches are now on Thursdays at same time, same place, but we are looking into having a more variable time slot so we can cater to the more worldwide audience. But again, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's directly live streamed to YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp, and you can follow along on the Cassandra Lunch playlist as well. So upcoming Cassandra events, we have Cassandra Lunch next week, our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch. Because Monday is a holiday, there is no Data Engineers Lunch on this upcoming Monday. You can find out more at events at Anant.us/events. And all of these Cassandra Lunch videos are available on the playlist. You can search on YouTube Cassandra Lunch and you should be able to find the playlist, or on Google itself. Cassandra.Link should be your #1 resource for all things Cassandra, as well as anything in the ecosystem that plays well with Cassandra. These links and resources are hand curated by the team here at Anant. So if you have any Cassandra.Link questions, or you're looking for a knowledge base related to Cassandra, Spark, Kafka, in the realm of Cassandra, check out Cassandra.link. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass it over to our guest speaker for today, Obi.
All right. Is my screen visible?
Yep.
Okay. All right. As you heard, I am Obi Anamnachi. I'm a data engineer here at Anant, and today's topic is on Cassandra API, DATASTAX, Astra, and Stargate. So essentially, Cassandra API is a project that we put out around the time Astra was released, early 2020, that worked with REST APIs written in Python, written in Node, in order to connect to data that was stored in Astra. And in this case, we're going to, because since then, Stargate has been added as a feature to Astra. So we're going to explore Stargate, and we're going to see how it slots in to our old project, to our Cassandra API project. So getting started with just the basic concepts. I prefer generally to take questions in the chat. Usually get to them in between portions of this presentation. So when we're moving from this slide presentation to the demo, or when we're finishing up the demo, those are the times I generally prefer to take questions. And during those times, it's also fine to unmute. But if you have questions during the in-between sections while I'm doing the presentation or while I'm doing the demo, I prefer to have them in chat. Okay, so starting off, DATASTAX Astra is cloud-native database as a service. It's offered by DATASTAX. It's built on Apache Cassandra, but it also has a bunch of other technologies surrounding it. In this case, the one we're going to talk about is Stargate. It's potentially cheaper than self-hosted Cassandra, or even potentially other managed Cassandras. And it also, you don't have to actually operate your own cluster. And there are all these advantages, a lot of which are, the advantages of Cassandra made available in database as a service, and others of which are advantages versus other potential options for deploying your Cassandra cluster, something like DSE, something like Apache Cassandra, open source version. Stargate is an API gateway. It's going to be the main sort of thing we're talking about today. That sits in between your client applications and your Cassandra databases, in this case Astra, but Stargate's also compatible with Cassandra 3.x, all those releases, Cassandra 4.0 releases, and then DSE 6.8. And you can see in this sort of visualization here that the various APIs, the Stargate layer sits above the Cassandra layer, and applications make requests to it, and you can get your data back in all sorts of different ways. I believe currently they have separate ones for REST and JSON, which I will go into in a second. But REST and JSON APIs, GraphQL, and then I believe gRPC is also implemented for Stargate with Astra. All right, continuing on a little bit, Stargate creates a number of different APIs. So the reason I said that the reason that in that diagram there was both a JSON and a REST API is because the REST API gives you back JSON. It's schema dependent, and it has those endpoints related to the schema, your key space, your table, your fields, all that sort of stuff. And then there's the document API, which is schemaless and just gives you back your JSON as a single object. There's the GraphQL API, and like I said, gRPC is, I believe, also already implemented and available if you're using Stargate with Astra. So the way Stargate works, you split the larger program up into 3 sections. There are the API extensions, which define your different types of APIs. It converts requests that come in and go out to and from database queries, and it handles communication with your clients. And then there's the persistence extensions, which communicate with your underlying database. There are separate persistence extensions for different Cassandra versions. So the list that we looked at just a second ago, whether you're using Astra, whether you're using Cassandra 3X, whether you're using Cassandra 4.0, or whether you're using DSE, your persistence extension is the one that connects to that. And it does that by using the inbuilt Java classes that Cassandra makes use of and interacts with your internal Cassandra objects, like your result set and your types of Cassandra objects. And then your authentication extension just controls access. So the way the persistence extensions actually work, and this is something that we don't often have reason to discuss on Cassandra Lunch. So questions or discussion or comments about coordinator nodes specifically would be appreciated, because we don't often have opportunity to talk about them. But effectively, Stargate works the persistence extensions by creating coordinator nodes on your Cassandra cluster. And what a coordinator node is it's a node that doesn't store data, but it still participates in gossip. It can still receive requests, and therefore it can furnish your requests without you having to make infrastructure for storing that data available on that node. So Stargate is essentially adding itself to your Cassandra cluster, but without becoming a node that stores data. All right, and this is sort of a description of those 3 sections. So you can see up at the top, there's a list, and those are all the API extensions: CQL, REST API, GraphQL API, etc. And at the bottom, there's your persistence extensions, which depend on whether you're using Cassandra 3 point something, Cassandra 4.0, or DSE 6.8. And then off on the side, it lists your authentication options. And those are those persistence modules. All right. So the last thing we need to talk about before we get into the demo is, what is Cassandra API? So that's a project that we at Anant were putting together in early 2020 around the launch of DATASTAX Astra. It's a tutorial effectively that has you load data into Astra, make it accessible via API, and show it in the UI. And it has examples of that API written in both Node and Python with Flask. And then the included APIs use the Cassandra driver for their language. So there's the Node.js Cassandra driver, and there's the Python Cassandra driver included in that code. And it converts your requests, your HTTP requests, into those actual CQL queries that go off to Cassandra. And then, since Stargate does a similar thing, the idea of this sort of presentation today is to substitute it for our own written APIs, to show that today it's easier to set up an API on Astra using Stargate than having to write your own APIs like we had to in the past. All right, we're about to move into the demo in a second, so this is a good time for questions. Let me know if any come up in the live chat as well. All right, so there are no questions. Today we're starting with the Cassandra API repo. So this is available. Let me just put the link in chat if anyone would prefer to follow along. You can't do everything I'm about to show you without having your own Astra instance spun up. Luckily, Astra is free. When you create your account, you get $25 limit, just free without even inputting a credit card. and you can create that basically whenever. All right, so we're also using Gitpod today. Gitpod is basically an online IDE. We're going to be doing all our work. The Cassandra API repo actually uses a custom Gitpod Docker image. So it takes a minute or two to come up, which is why I've already loaded this one for today. All right, so getting started. First, we're going to go through a little bit of the old process to see what is required to set up your API using the Cassandra drivers, and then show off that we can still get data, we can show it in the UI, and then later we're going to substitute in Stargate for that functionality. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to upload our Secure Connect bundle, which you get from your Astra if you hit connect, and depending on which driver you're using, you can go and you can download the Secure Connect bundle there. And then we are going to put all our credentials in this JSON file. Make sure that's saved. And the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to actually run what is this called? So the Astra import section of Cassandra API creates your table in your Astra database, and then it uploads data, which is the data is actually included. It's in asset somewhere. It's just a JSON file with a couple of rows. But previously, this was pulling down from a REST API that already existed, uploading it to Astra, and then going from there. But in this case, the data is just packaged in with the repo. What we're going to do, Astra import. Oh wait, the default is like 10 rows. I think we actually want to increase that. Let's get 100 rows. All right, loading data to our Astra instance. If we want to, the Astra site also includes a shell, so a CQL shell. So you could go in and look at your data there if you wanted to, but since we're putting it up in a REST API, we'll just look at it then. And that's in fact the next thing we're going to do. I'm going to run the Python API, mostly because I wrote that one. It's the one I'm more familiar with. You're missing modules. All right. API, leaves API Python, text. All right, let's try running this again. All right. All right, so you can see we have data. This is like full web pages, including their HTML content. So it gets a little bit messy just to look at, but you can see that we have our data. One of the things here to keep in mind for later is that because we wrote this API, we determine how it gives back this data. So we get our dates here back as strings, and that's actually going to create a slight conflict when we go in later because we didn't write the Stargate API. It's going to give it back in a format that it decides. So it's not necessarily one-to-one switching from a handwritten API switching to a Stargate API. All right, next thing we want to do, see if we can get the UI to spin up. And the first thing we want to do for that is set up our env file. So what we're doing is we're grabbing the URL of our REST API, adding it to the env file. And then it's saved here as env.example, but we just want a .env file. So make sure it's saved like that. Go into the Astra UI section, install, whoops. It's reading documentation for Astra Stargate where it tells you how data types are returned. I do not believe so. We do have their API reference. But I have not seen anywhere here where it's telling you specifically about types and how they're returned. Oh wait, before we npm start here, we actually need to set this to public. So previously, the way that Gitpod handled ports is they would all come up on the same URL. So you would have your Gitpod URL, and then the ports would come up, and they would actually be ports on that machine. But the way they do it now, you can see we're not on this same URL anymore. There's one specific to this workspace and this port. So we have to set the port to be public so that when the UI comes up on a different URL, that it can still access that. Course issues. That's a bit annoying. I'll move on for now. And we will just use the Stargate API And I'll come back to this later if there's time. All right, so what we want to do before we do anything like connecting our UI to the Stargate API is make sure that it's up and that we can access it. And the first thing we need to do is we need to set environment variables for all of our connection stuff. So the AstraDB ID and region determine the URL, and the key space determines your path. And then you need the application token in order to be able to successfully request data. So the first request we're going to make is this one. It's a GET request. It goes out to the URL determined by your DB ID and region. And then API REST, we're using the version 2 API. The details for version 1 are still here in their Swagger documentation, but we're using version 2. And then we're going into key spaces. We're going to choose our specific key space. We're going to, and then the argument after that is the table name, and we're going to end it with rows. So this should give back exactly the same results as, well, not exactly the same, barring those type mismatches like I mentioned before. But it gives back our data in JSON form, and it gives back all the rows. So it's going to do something like this. And I'm just going to put it in a file. Oh wait, I'm in.
You may just need to refresh your Explorer at the top to the right. Yeah. If you hover over like Cassandra API, a little lower. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Yeah, so we can see we put in 100 rows into the database, we got out 100 rows. We can also specify further in our request, if we grab a specific ID, rather than leaves/rows, you go to the specific ID. So in this case, what it wants is your entire primary ID. If there's more than one field, it gets separated by slashes. But in this case, our primary key is just an ID. So we can get back one full row by making this sort of request. And then we can go further. With this request, which beyond the single row ID, we are defining the fields that we want back. So in this case, we're getting back user email and created at, and this is where you'll see the date difference in detail. So before, what we got was a date string, but in this case, what we're getting back is nano and seconds since the Linux epoch. And essentially, the UI was unable to display a date using this because it's a different format. All right, so in subbing in the Astra UI, our old request for a new request, set out the full path for this somewhere. One moment. Astra UI source views leaves components leaves table.js. Here we go. All right, so the main GET request is made here. All it does is it takes the URL from the env file, adds on, where the data actually is, gets all the rows, and then processes them for use in the UI. And we're going to replace that with our own query. In this case, I have filled in all of the things that were environment variables in these requests. So the AstraDB ID, the region, and then the key space here have all been filled in. And then the token has been filled in here as well. Oh, error. That's what's going on. So if you look at, do we still have results open? If you look at the results here and you look at what the API was giving back, they're actually at different levels. Basically, we just need to specify where the data starts in this actual result that it's giving back to make it match what we're already doing in our API. And we do that right here. We want the data object out of that full result text. And now we have a UI with data in. And you can see, because of that date type mismatch, all of our date rows show invalid date, but we still do have all of our articles here. So the next step for this would be to, also make sure of the edit and delete functionality, and replace those requests with the put requests for the Stargate API, but I haven't actually completed that step yet. So this is basically what I have for today. If there are questions about Cassandra API, about Stargate, or just general data engineering stuff, anything related to Cassandra, I guess.
Yeah, I know that in Stargate / Astra, there's the GraphQL has like 2 ways. I think you can like do GraphQL first, and it creates your schema, and then there's the other way where I think you create schema and you can. I don't know. I forget the exact difference in terms of like what they call it. Yeah, so create a table. You can create a table using GraphQL, but I thought there was another way where like you have tables and you can get the data via GraphQL. Is that true? Or am I just kind of making that up?
I'm not sure what, like, even with the normal REST API, you can both create create a key space, create a table, if you have the proper authorization, at least.
No, I got that. I'm saying like when you go to GraphQL, okay, I think you have it there. In this case, you create basically a model, and it makes the table and it puts all this stuff in there, and then you scroll all the way down. All the way down, I think. Yep, keep going. Nope, I think you have to go up. Basically, I thought that there was a query where you could say, give me something from a generic table, right? Given a generic table, give me these fields. Like books is something that you created using the GraphQL mutation. I was wondering if there's a way to get data back without you using GraphQL to create the table. Like if you could, can you use GraphQL to just get data?
Yeah, I think you should be able to, because there's a query key space on here, and I think I've actually done that before using the GraphQL API. I think at that time, there may have been some limitations in terms of the mutations when I had last done it, but it looks like you can now do mutations. But I think Obi, if you put in your token into the GraphQL or the GraphQL playground, you might be able to confirm. I think that's the only reason it errored out potentially.
So I guess what I was saying is that, is it possible to use the REST API to put data in and then use GraphQL to pull it back,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can.
Yeah.
Using the REST API, we can definitely create tables and add data into the tables.
It's more of like, does the GraphQL API require a mutation based table, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at, Rahul?
Does a GraphQL query require a GraphQL defined, mutation to create that table in the first place?
Maybe in the headers on the left corner down there, you can find HTTP headers and then add maybe the token. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, there's a maybe we can do this in another session, but there's a React project called React Grid, which I think works with REST, but can also work with GraphQL. Where it'd be kind of cool to even replace the UI using the kind of open source React Grid. I'm trying to find it. I don't think this is it. I know I've seen it. It's open source and it has basically providers to connect different data sources. I'll send that later in our internal channel if I find it.
Yeah, Obi, I think you can use the playground and click through you should be able to use the schema and build out the query in the playground on the right side. Yeah, so I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you see there are key spaces. It shows you the system key spaces. It shows you killer videos. I'm pretty sure if you do a query and you give it the right key space, you should be able to get the objects back. I think you had it. I think it was the last one. Yeah, the query. So yeah, in there, I think you have to give it what is the key space you want to query. So yeah, in GraphQL, you don't need to put the type query. You can just put, you can, I think you can just put the brackets, because that's what you were able to do. And then you have to give it, what is the key space you're trying to get from. But that particular query, you have to take a look at their documentation, but I think it's worth exploring. We don't have to do that now, but good presentation. Now we have 6 ways to skin a cat.
Yeah. So I guess an extension of like Stargate and APIs in general, right? Because at the time when we had built Cassandra API, I think Stargate was probably still in development or figuring out that aspect of it. But
Yeah,
like,
it definitely wasn't at least available for Astra.
what would be, I guess, potentially like, what would be the use case of using, I guess the more question is, why would you build your own API using the driver over using Stargate?
All right, yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about while doing this is like basically authentication and compartmentalization. So if you give someone a read write token with your for your Stargate, that means they have access to anything in that Astra instance, right? Versus if you write your own API, only the requests specifically created by you will be valid. So for example, someone could, if we had a second table in this key space, so rather than just the leaves table, there was also separate tables. If you gave someone a client ID, asked them to connect via Stargate, they could use that ID to get into the second table.
Hmm.
Whereas if you wrote them an API that only works for the first table, it would only work for the first table.
Yeah, I think the other, I think authentication is important, compartmentalization is important. And when we think about it from a microservices perspective, Stargate is giving us a set of microservices, but not all consumers should access this microservice. So what we should do is to create a facade microservice that basically only gives, what is needed. The other approach, of course, in the Cassandra world would be you create multiple, realms of data where you just, because of the authentication tokens, you would put data that is non-sensitive or whatever in one table or key space and have access tokens for that, and then you have other key spaces and tables for more information. That way, you've basically put the materialized information in Astra as you want to retrieve it. It's just because you can say something has read or write or both access, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think you can do it both ways, but the freedom to manipulate data on the way back, I think you lose that in Stargate. You get some ability with GraphQL, but if you want to do any manipulation on the data or do what we would call like a client-side join. So GraphQL can do client-side joins, quote unquote. But if we wanted to do any other type of joins with other data, then we really can't do it. But I think it's a great addition to have in the toolkit. Very cool.
All right. If there are no more questions, that's all I had for today. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions from the YouTube chat. Before we round out, I wanted to open up the floor if you're watching on YouTube as well. Does anyone have any like topics that they would like to have covered in the next near upcoming future, or even just put into our backlog of someday maybe? But we're always open to seeing what the community wants to learn, or also if you want to be a guest speaker, you can learn it and then teach it to the community. We offer this the ability to do so. You can just reach out to me, arpan.patel@anant.us. But with that, we will wrap it up and we will see you guys next week. Take care.